Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. Some background: 5 years ago, I bought a beautiful 3-acre property with a long private driveway about 20 miles outside of Seattle. The house sits back about 200 feet from the main road, which gives me plenty of privacy, or at least it did until recently. When I bought the place, there was an empty lot next door, but about 2 years ago, a developer bought it and built a gated community called Pine Valley Estates. At first, everything was fine. The construction was a bit noisy, but the developers were professional and respected my property lines. Once people started moving in, I'd wave to my new neighbors and even made friends with a few of them. Then last year, they established their HOA, and that's when the trouble started. The first sign of problems came when I received a letter in my mailbox from the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association about my unkempt landscaping. I actually laughed when I read it, thinking it must be a mistake. I called the number listed and spoke with Rebecca Mitchell, their newly elected HOA president. "Hi, this is Jack Lewis. I received a letter about landscaping violations, but there must be some confusion. I'm not part of your HOA. "Oh yes, Mr. Lewis," Rebecca replied in a condescending tone. "We're well aware. However, your property is visible from our community and affects our property values. We expect all neighboring properties to maintain certain standards." I was taken aback by her attitude. "Ma'am, you have no authority over my property. I'm not a member of your HOA and never will be." "We'll see about that," she said before hanging up. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A week later, I came home from work to find a guy in a Pine Valley security polo shirt walking up my driveway with a clipboard, taking notes and photos. I pulled up beside him and rolled down my window. "Can I help you?" He barely glanced at me. "Just conducting a routine inspection. You have several violations that need to be addressed." "Excuse me?" I got out of my car. "This is private property. You have no right to be here." He finally looked up, clearly annoyed. "Sir, I'm authorized by the Pine Valley HOA to conduct inspections and issue citations as needed." "Not on my property, you're not," I said firmly. "I'm not part of your HOA. This is private property and you're trespassing. Leave now." He scoffed but started walking back toward the gate. "You'll be hearing from the board about this uncooperative attitude." Sure enough, the next day I got another letter, this time citing me for interfering with HOA security personnel and demanding I pay a $150 fine. I decided it was time to take action before this got out of hand. I called my lawyer, Jessica Collins, who had handled my closing when I bought the property. She listened to the situation and was just as baffled as I was by their behavior. "This is completely ridiculous," she said. "They have zero authority over your property. Let me send them a cease and desist letter." I agreed, but I also wanted to be prepared in case they didn't back off. I installed security cameras covering my driveway and property line. I also put up "private property, no trespassing" signs at the entrance to my driveway. The cease and desist letter seemed to work. For about a week. Then one Saturday morning, I was doing yard work when I heard a golf cart coming up my driveway. I looked up to see Rebecca herself, along with 2 other HOA board members conducting their own inspection. I walked over to confront them. "Did you not receive the cease and desist letter from my attorney?" "You're trespassing." Rebecca smiled, that condescending smile of hers. "Actually, Mr. Lewis, we've reviewed our bylaws and determined that our authority extends to all properties that impact our community's aesthetic value. Your lawyer's letter holds no weight." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "This is private property. You were served with a cease and desist letter. Leave now or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," one of the other board members sneered. "We have every right to be here." So I called the police. While we waited, Rebecca and her cronies continued their inspection, writing down alleged violations and taking photos. When Officer Miller arrived about 15 minutes later, they acted like they owned the place. "Officer, we're conducting a routine HOA inspection," Rebecca said confidently. "This man is interfering with our duties." I showed Officer Miller my property deed, the cease and desist letter, and my security camera footage of their repeated trespassing. He quickly understood the situation. "Ma'am, this property is not part of your HOA," he explained to Rebecca. "You have no authority here. You need to leave immediately." "But our bylaws clearly state," Rebecca started to argue. "Your bylaws don't override property law," Officer Miller interrupted. "Leave now or you'll be arrested for criminal trespassing." They finally left, but Rebecca couldn't resist a parting shot. "This isn't over, Lewis. One way or another, you'll comply with our standards." I thought about letting it go, but their behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive. The next day, they posted a notice at their community entrance declaring my property a nuisance and warning residents about my dangerous and uncooperative attitude. That's when I decided to fight back. I had Jessica file a harassment lawsuit against the HOA and its board members personally. We had plenty of evidence, their threatening letters, security camera footage of multiple trespassing incidents, witness statements from neighbors who had seen their patrols, and the police report from Officer Miller. The HOA's lawyer contacted Jessica almost immediately, trying to negotiate. They offered to stop the patrols if I would drop the lawsuit, but I wasn't interested in letting them off that easily. They need to learn they can't just bully people like this, I told Jessica. Let's take it to court. The day of the hearing, Rebecca and her board members showed up in business attire, looking confident. That confidence started to fade as Jessica presented our evidence. The judge was particularly interested in the security camera footage showing their repeated trespassing after receiving the cease and desist letter. Mrs. Mitchell, the judge asked, can you explain why you continued to enter Mr. Lewis's property after being explicitly told not to and receiving a cease and desist letter? Rebecca straightened her spine. Your Honor, our HOA bylaws give us the authority to inspect any property that impacts our community's value. The judge didn't look impressed. Mrs. Mitchell, HOA bylaws don't grant you authority over private property outside your jurisdiction. This isn't just a civil matter. You're lucky Mr. Lewis didn't press criminal charges for trespassing. That's when Rebecca's lawyer asked for a brief recess. When we returned, they were ready to settle. But I had conditions. 1. A written admission that they had no authority over my property. 2. A permanent injunction preventing them from entering my property. 3. Removal of all notices and statements about my property. 4. Payment of my legal fees. 5. A $10,000 payment for harassment and emotional distress. 6. Individual written apologies from each board member who trespassed. Their lawyer balked at the amount, but Jessica held firm. She reminded them that if we continued to trial, we'd be asking for much more, and she'd be adding punitive damages for their willful disregard of the cease and desist letter. They finally agreed to everything except the individual apologies. I decided to accept that compromise, mainly because I wanted this over with. The judge approved our settlement and made it a court order. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca approached me. I hope you're happy, she said bitterly. You've made enemies of a lot of powerful people. I just smiled. No, Rebecca, I stood up to bullies who thought they could abuse their power. There's a difference. The aftermath was pretty satisfying. The HOA had to send a formal notice to all residents admitting they had no authority over my property and retracting their previous statements about me. Rebecca and 2 other board members resigned after residents learned how much their harassment campaign had cost the HOA. I used part of the settlement money to install an electronic gate at the entrance to my driveway. The rest I donated to a legal aid organization that helps people fight HOA abuse. My property remains exactly as it was, well maintained, but definitely not up to Pine Valley's standards. The new HOA board is much more reasonable. They actually apologized for their predecessor's behavior and invited me to their community BBQ as a peace offering. I declined politely, preferring to maintain a respectful distance. These days, the only people who come up my driveway are invited guests. The security cameras are still running, though, just in case anyone else gets ideas about having authority where they don't. Edit. Wow. This blew up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions, 1. Yes, I still have all the security footage. My lawyer advised me to keep it. 2. Rebecca and her crew did try to fight the settlement terms initially, but the judge shut that down fast. 3. Several Pine Valley residents have reached out privately to thank me for standing up to the old board. Apparently, they were just as tyrannical within their actual jurisdiction. 4. For those asking, yes, my property values have actually increased since this happened. Turns out not everyone wants to live under strict HOA control. Update, it's been 6 months since my original post, and there have been some interesting developments. The Pine Valley HOA drama didn't quite end with the settlement, but the latest twists have made everything worth it. Remember Rebecca, our power-tripping former HOA president? Well, she didn't take her resignation lying down. She tried to rally support among residents to overturn the settlement agreement, claiming I had manipulated the legal system. That backfired spectacularly when my lawyer showed up at their next board meeting with copies of all the evidence we had, including some stuff we hadn't even used in the original case. Turns out Rebecca and her friends on the board had been pulling similar stunts with other neighboring properties. 3 other homeowners came forward with stories about harassment and bogus fines. But here's the real kicker. They'd been documenting all of this in their official HOA emails, which became public record during our lawsuit. One of the residents, a retired judge named Bill Henderson, was so outraged he decided to run for the board himself. He won in a landslide, along with several other reform-minded residents. The first thing they did was hire a professional management company to handle HOA operations properly. The new board also discovered that Rebecca had been using HOA funds to pay for her security patrols without proper authorization. They're now pursuing legal action against her to recover the money. Karma really does come back around, but the most satisfying development came last month. A young couple looking to buy in Pine Valley contacted me through my lawyer. They wanted to know the real story behind all the drama because Rebecca, who still lives there, had been telling potential buyers I was some kind of troublemaker who decreased property values. I showed them all my documentation, including video of Rebecca's patrols and the court settlement. They were horrified and grateful. They ended up buying the house, but more importantly, they shared the information with their realtor. Now, every potential buyer gets told the true story about how the old board abused their power. Rebecca put her house up for sale last week. Apparently, living next to the person who exposed her corruption isn't as fun as she thought it would be. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. The new HOA board has been true to their word about respecting property rights. They even updated their bylaws to explicitly state that their authority ends at their property lines. Apparently, I'm not the first person they've had issues with over this. My lawyer, Jessica, says the case has become something of a legend in local real estate circles. She's had several other homeowners contact her about similar situations with overzealous HOAs. We're thinking about putting together a workshop to help people understand their rights when dealing with HOA overreach. As for my property, it's exactly the same as it was before all this started. Well maintained, but definitely not up to Pine Valley's old standards. My new neighbors seem to appreciate having a buffer between them and the main road. Several have even asked for advice about starting their own vegetable gardens after seeing my success with mine. The security cameras and gate are still in place. They're just good sense these days, but I haven't had to use any of that footage in months. The most excitement I get now is watching the local wildlife use my driveway as their personal highway. Much better than HOA patrols. Final thoughts? Sometimes standing up to bullies costs money and time, but it's worth it in the end, not just for yourself, but for everyone else they might try to push around. Rebecca learned the hard way that having power doesn't make you right. It just makes you more accountable when you abuse it. Oh, and one last thing. Remember that legal aid organization I donated some of the settlement money to? They've successfully helped 3 other homeowners fight back against HOA overreach in our county alone. Sometimes the best revenge is helping others stand up for themselves, too. Life is peaceful now, just the way I like it. My driveway is patrol-free, my property remains under my control, and the only clipboard-wielding inspectors I have to deal with are the ones I actually invite onto my property. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones that let you live your life in peace. The end. For real this time. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I was discussing this sub with a good friend and he said, "Boy, have I got a story that'll fit." It wasn't his story but his brother's, and I sat with him and got the details. Buckle up, it's a good one. And a long one. Let's call him Bob. Bob has been fiddling with computers since he was a kid, and knows them pretty well. As with most IT people, he's moved from job to job. The employer he worked for was a service distribution company, and there were 2 IT employees. The company was located in Ontario, Canada. About 3 years ago, Bob's employer decided to modernize their software. They had separate programs for dispatching, for inventory, for payroll and finances, and it was complicated moving information from one program to the other. They decided to get an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning program, and Bob recommended one that he knew inside out from a previous employer. For those of you who don't know, an ERP program handles everything. Purchase orders, sales, inventory, personnel, vendors, customers, all of it. You can run a report and find out which customer has bought the most part ABC in the last year, which salesman has improved his numbers the most, which vendor has the fastest delivery time, which shipper packed the most orders. Everyone in the company used the ERP program, but it was very complicated, and they used the aspects of it that related to their position. For example, the receiver would accept a shipment, verify the quantity, confirm it was received, and the inventory stats would be available to the salespeople if they wanted to look up how many were on hand. The receiver didn't care what the price was or who the vendor was, he just did his job. Bob was run ragged during the implementation process, but he managed to train most of the employees on their aspects, and after a few months, everything was running fairly smoothly. Bob still got tickets for tweaks in the operation of the software and occasional hardware IT issues. Then the company decided to expand their footprint and was marketing into different time zones. That messed things up. Atlantic Canada is 90 minutes early, so if someone sent an email or an order at 8 a.m. their time, it would arrive at 6:30 a.m. Ontario time. Pacific Canada is 3 hours late, so an email sent at 3 p.m. Vancouver time would arrive at 6 p.m. This stretched out the day, so many staff came in early and worked late. Bob would arrive at 8 a.m. and there would be people that demanded his immediate assistance and were annoyed that he didn't respond instantly, even though their request was submitted before his start time. Same with late in the day, his phone would ring at dinner time with people that wanted help right now. They decided to stagger his and his IT colleagues' shift times. Bob would start at 6 a.m. and work till 2:30, and his colleague would start at 10:30 a.m. and work till 7 p.m. Bob's colleague had kids and refused the shift change. The employer insisted. The colleague quit. That meant that Bob was the only person in the IT department. The employer said they would look to hire a new IT guy, but they had trouble finding one that knew the ERP system, and they were offering well under a market value salary. Bob asked for a raise and was denied. Then he wanted overtime, and the employer told him that as an IT specialist, he was exempt from overtime laws in Ontario. Bob looked it up, and the employer was correct. This went on for some time, and he knew lots of IT people socially. They told him what the company was offering, and Bob knew that they wouldn't find another tech. Things went downhill from there. Bob would get chewed out if he missed a call or an email, no matter what time it came in. He had to train new hires in the ERP system, as well as take care of the hardware. He asked repeatedly for better compensation and was denied. So, he planned to get a new job. Now here's the revenge. Bob had access to the entirety of the ERP program. When a user signed in, the time was logged, and even if they didn't sign out, after 15 minutes it would log them out anyway. Everyone in the company was on salary, and many of them came in early and stayed late. Ontario labor law states that even salaried workers are entitled to overtime after 44 hours a week, unless they were managers or supervisors. So Bob jumped into the program and ran a report for each employee that wasn't a manager, all the way back to when the ERP program was started. Then he reached out to an employment lawyer and got the okay to refer employees to him. Bob lined up another job, and after he left, every employee in the company got an email with an Excel sheet showing the hours they had put in past 44 hours a week. The subject line said, "You're legally entitled to overtime pay." In the body of the email was the lawyer's name. The shit hit the fan. Almost every employee authorized the lawyer to negotiate with the company on their behalf, and the company had to pay a ton of money. All the company had to do was pay Bob for the extra work he put in. Instead, they had to pay almost everyone. The next one is a malicious compliances story. Where I work, many of my coworkers have visible tattoos, and it's never been an issue. Even some of the assistant managers and higher-ups have tattoos that can be seen while in uniform. For some context, during the summer months, we are allowed to wear shorts if we want to do so. I get very warm during the summer and just don't handle the heat well, so I opt to wear shorts almost every day from May-August. I have a tattoo of a mermaid of the side of my lower leg. It's a typical American traditional mermaid, and she has breasts. The nipple of the mermaid is a black dot, simple and small. It's not overly sexualized or drawn in a pornographic style. Plus, it's on the side of my lower leg mixed in with many other tattoos so it doesn't stick out. For a few weeks, I had no issue with the tattoo. I even had one manager comment on my leg pieces saying he liked the style. However, one day, one of the assistant managers came up to me and told me my tattoo was all of a sudden inappropriate and out of line for work. She demanded I wear pants or completely cover the chest of the mermaid tattoo every day. I asked her if a customer had complained or if our manager had said something. She said no, that only she took offense by the tattoo and she demanded I cover it. I asked a bunch of people and they thought she was being ridiculous, but this particular manager had a history of steam rolling over everyone and getting her way. Even other assistant managers had issues with her in the past. So I decided fine, I have to cover the nipples of the mermaid. That's what I should do then. I went to several craft stores to find as many seashell, sea-themed stickers I could find. I also bought some small gemstone stickers and thread. I used the gemstone and thread to make tiny breast tassels for the mermaid. They were super cute and drew lots of attention. I had coworkers and customers all commenting on how cute the tassels were and how creative it was to do that as a cover. The assistant manager that had forced me to cover the tattoo saw what I had done and she wasn't pleased. She had thought I would use band-aids or something to cover the tattoo instead, but I got her to admit that I was technically following her demand as the mermaid nipples were no longer visible. The longer I had to keep the tattoo covered, the more creative I got with it. I used all sorts of fun, flashy stickers and designs. I even used googly eyes at one point. All my coworkers loved it as they agreed it was unnecessary to demand me to cover the tattoo in the first place. Eventually, that assistant manager was fired, and when she left, I stopped covering the mermaid. I haven't had any issue with any other managers about it, so I think the issue is resolved, and at least I had some fun while it lasted. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.